found another practice test, and this is what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give this to you, and same deal, don't write on, but if you just want to do some more questions on your own, it's not an assignment, it's just a practice. It's for the College Board 2016, just something to look at. Oh no, that one you can write on, not the practice test.
Not the practice test that is going around over there. Is that the one you gave us?
No, it's a different one. What I gave you was 2016 second practice test. The College Board has made 2. Yeah, Tuesday. And this is something you already. So what this is, a while ago, oh, and then also take out your review packet. I will go over any ones you do not have. I'll go over anything in the review packet that you want me to help fill out, or anything you're not sure about. I'll stop halfway with a break, and then I'll go over anything you need on the couple hints of the DB2, things like that. And then we're going to go up on stage.
Actually, we do it 2 minutes.
Hey guys.
Yeah. What is?
I saw your car.
I guess.
And I looked at the car and the car was asking well. So are you doing 6? Okay, I'm gonna. Did you look at the total closet? No, I have. I started this morning. And I've been doing it all day.
Ooh, there's a Smart Agent update for me. Yes.
I have a question about.
Also, we love
Let's go through this real quick. Let's get everyone here. Does everybody have one of these? If you're just coming in.
Mexico. US? Attack.
Little premature.
Everybody. Any answers to these?
Not the first time I go back.
Where are they? Oh, they're right here.
Wait, what's that?
And then we have any.
I'm really tired. I'm so tired. They are the review book. And the review book. That's fine, because my notes have been all on this practice. So this is what I have right now.
All right, so let's get going. Before I answer any questions about the Treaty of Greenville, what we passed around, this is a really handy review sheet. Where are the extra ones of these? These are practice steps.
Yeah.
Who does not have one of these? Everyone have one of these? All right. I got to go all the way over there. You only have one side?
Too bad.
You're kidding me. Does anybody else only have one side? All right. So this one I had it all right here. This is, it's AP topic review. It's a great study thing that an idea that a student had about 10 years ago, and I really like the idea. And so what it is this. It gives you 2 things at once. First thing, it goes through each period. They arbitrarily break it down to periods. And I also put down the approximate percentage of tests will be in each one. And is the door not open? Those lights are just
The door looks pretty open.
No, she just walked out. I'm talking to my imaginary friends. I want to make it look like, you know, somebody actually kind of likes me. So, with this, each point, if you can't come up with 10 to 15 things on your own, if you can't come up with 10 facts about you know, the motives to get into World War I and the impact, you know an area you need to go back and study and go back and review. It's a really easy way to do that. And part 2 about this, if you look at this a few times, just go through it, remind yourself of these issues. This let's say the question is about the causes of the New Deal, an essay question. Sound good? Context would be the other things on here in that period. So the context would be things like the 20s economy and the social, political, economic change. That would give you context. Was there somebody outside trying to get in, or you just left? Oh, okay. And so go through this. If you can't come up with 10 to 15 things, and you know an area to go back to your review packet and look. If you can come up with 10 things, that's fine. And by the way, I know there's a lot of you probably, I can't come up with one thing for some of these. Well, first off, that's kind of on you. But secondly, that's why we're doing the review. That's why we're going through these packets. That's why I put the packets the way I do. So it forces you to remember these things, remind yourself what's in here. And going through this helps immensely. So practice this, just do it on your own. This is just for you. But also, why don't we do this? I am filming this. It's giving a very good image of my calves, which is exciting, don't get me wrong. Okay. So I would go through any ones you do not have on this review packet, I will answer the question. I'll answer anything you want. So with the first one, it's on page, is that first page or second page? Second page, Treaty of Greenville, 1794. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I want a microphone that just blasts through the hallways. I already blasted the hallways anyway. So second page, page 2, Treaty of Greenville. Is that right? It's page 3, which is so obvious. And that would be the treaty after the United States, the brand new United States Army defeated a confederation of tribes of the old Northwest in Indiana, battle called Fallen Timbers. And after that battle, that gave the United States control of Ohio. And then the rest of the old Northwest would be American Indian land for all eternity. All eternity lasted about 6 or 7 minutes. So the United States started violating that treaty. But this is an important precedent to get a treaty to gain land and then break the treaty, which will lead to another war. So Treaty of Greenville, that's a really big one. So it would directly lead to even more important battle, Battle of Tippecanoe, 1811. Another one we can't find. See, I go through a lot here. Another one. Anyone we cannot find on that list? The first, I'm looking at the first 4 pages at first. One you can't find. Which one? Oh, Anne Hutchinson, Roger Williams, and that's on the first page, right? Anne Hutchinson, both Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams were dissenters in the Puritan colony of Massachusetts. And they both spoke out against the tyranny of the Puritan church, trying to control everybody's life to make this perfect religious state. Hutchinson would be kicked out because she did not like the idea that the church was literally dictating what everybody had to do. And so she was kicked out and would be killed on Long Island, but would become a real symbol for a combination of either religious freedom or, but also for women's rights. Roger Williams would also be kicked out, and he would go form his own colony of Rhode Island. He would form Rhode Island, based upon the idea of a separation of church and state, and also to treat the American Indians there fairly. But that's, he was an incredibly religious man, didn't like the idea that political figures were dominating the religion. So those are 2 examples of dissenters. Is there another one? Raise your hand. Yes. Oh, the encomienda. That, I know. Those are the plantations that they would be credited in New Spain. And they would be given to leading either Spanish conquistador, soldiers of fortunes, sons of noblemen. It's like right in the middle of first period. Is it first period or second period? Period 1. And all the American Indians, surviving American Indians there, they would be essentially slaves. Any others? Yeah, for right now. If there may be others, we'll go through a while and then I'll expand. Sound good? Yeah. Okay, New Spain. New Spain would be the colony that would stretch all the way from the southwestern United States all the way to Argentina. And they tried to set up a colony where they forced the assimilation, forced the American Indians to become very much like, or to adopt the culture of the Spanish, especially convert to Catholicism. And they enslaved American Indians and brought in African slaves. And there was a big revolt around Santa Fe, New Mexico. What is Santa Fe, New Mexico now? And these would be a revolt where they actually kicked the Spanish out for 10 years. And these were mostly Navajo and Zuni. And they kicked them out for 10 years until eventually the Spanish would come and brutally put them down. And the reason why that has been used in the past as a question on one of the questions for the first section, the Pueblo revolt. The idea that even though they were devastated by disease, they still fought back. So another one. Yes. The first three. I don't have it in front of me. Okay, I'm going to try again. This is. I have no idea what it's doing now, but we're doing it on my phone. Thank goodness I have the computer that isn't working on here. All right, so here we go. Where were we? That was fun. Okay, the Southwest tribes, and the Southwest tribes, the one, these would be up until about 1200 AD. They would be very big agricultural tribes, mostly growing beans and maize, and were quite big and successful and known for living in pueblos, which these were either be adobe buildings or buildings built in the side of mountains. And they used irrigation. They had vast trade networks throughout the entire western United States. But in about 1200, there was a drought. And the drought with bad farming techniques and probably over irrigation would lead to the destruction of many of these tribes. So when the Spanish arrived, they were just beginning to rebound. And then the plagues hit. The Great Plains tribes, the big thing about these tribes, they by definition were nomadic because of the lack of water. And even though they did some farming, they did some farming. They would do farming, river bottoms kind of farm, move away, come back when it's ready to cultivate. But they were mostly nomadic, and because they're nomadic, these tribes are always going to be pretty small. They'll do some kind of planning to make sure they're not that big, so I got to move and move and follow whatever herd, basically follow the bison herds. And the large of these would be the Lakota. The Lakota and the Lakota, and my mind is full, and Teton Sioux. And they'd be called Sioux by either the Spanish or the French traders, but that name is stuck. And they were very territorial. They fought for land of the Great Plains, and they would be radically changed when the horse arrived from Spain. The Eastern Mississippi and Iroquois, those were massive tribes. Had cities, trade networks. They built massive mounds and burial temples and conical temples, trade networks. Cities like Cahokia, which is near present-day St. Louis, might have been as many as 1 million people. These vast trade networks, very, very advanced culturally, and the biggest were the Iroquois. And the 5 Iroquois nations had a confederacy, a loose confederacy, but a confederacy in the Northeast with a common language. And they would, when the British and the French arrived, they'd be right in the middle between the British and the French. And they tried to play the others off on each other. They eventually allied with the British and then would fight the Americans during the Revolutionary War, fight the colonists. And of course, they would lose. But they too would be devastated by disease. So those are 3 big tribes. Is there another one? I went through that. Yes. So Constitutional Convention, yeah, that's down, where are we at here? Oh yeah, top of page 3. And so the convention, don't forget, it was right after Shays' Rebellion, was to create a strong government. They decided to meet in secret. So they could not be accused of treason. And there were all kinds of compromises that needed to be made. And the biggest would be the Great Compromise, that compromised the big state, the Virginia plan, and the small state plan, the New Jersey plan. And what it did basically is it created a 2-house legislature. The House decided by population and the Senate equal by state to compromise big state and small state. And then another part of the compromise was there would be a very powerful executive, but then they really weren't sure about the House, who would pick the president, but decided as the Electoral College. It would pick the president, which still picks the president to this day. And James Madison, who's the father of the Constitution, greatly liked the French philosopher Montesquieu. And Montesquieu believed in the separation of powers, so no one branch is too strong. So with the separation of powers, there'll be a series of checks and balances. Checks between the executive, the legislature, and the judicial. And the biggest of these checks is going to be either the veto overriding the veto or judicial review. That wasn't in the Constitution, but it was kind of accepted, and they just gave themselves that power. That's a very quick version of that. Did we get okay? Any parts of that I went too fast, or?
It was the big state, small state, and what was that?
It's just called the Great Compromise.
What happened?
That one they divided up. That's where they made the separate House of Representatives that would be by population, and the Senate equal by state. Is there another one? New England. Oh yeah, sure. New England economy. Where's that one at? First page. So the New England economy, because of the terrain, it was much more diversified. And so it was farming, had farming, shipping, lumber, timber, fur trade, rum, iron, a much more diversified economy in the north, in those New England colonies. And because of that diversification, it led to a seemingly more equal society, where the gap between the rich and the poor was not near as big in the north or the south. In the north and the south, it was who had the land was on top. But so the big thing about this one, it's because of the terrain. Once the United States became a country, when immigrants are going to start coming to the United States, a significant majority are going to go to New England because there's more chance for success. Well, in the South, they didn't have that. Is there another one? Oh, almost forgot one thing. The New England colonies, it also fit in with the very Puritan ideal of that hard work and success in business proves that you're going to heaven. And so that fit in with that ideal. Is there another one? Yes. So the Chesapeake Colony did much differently. Plantation, agriculture, and very much a hierarchy. And so those who had the plantations were on top, like the Burgesses in Virginia, who would be the legislature. They ran the colonies. And then it would be the small landholders and then everybody else. And part of that economy would be they needed labor to work those lands. And that's why they enslaved basically anybody they could enslave, American Indians and also African slaves, and also white slaves from England. Remember what they were called for the 7-year hitch? Indentured servants. And this colony, the basis of there would be farming, there would be a fur trade, but the biggest were plantation agriculture, and at first it was tobacco, and then more and more it became cotton, or eventually in the 19th century it became cotton, but also rice and indigo. But it's very much a hierarchy. The big landholders are going to run things. They're going to act like they're a country gentleman in England. Is there another one? I'll say one. Wait a second. Yeah.
On Shays Rebellion, what was like the big idea?
Okay, the big thing about Shays Rebellion, you had those poor farmers, many veterans of the war felt like they were mistreated. And also, is that the bottom of page 2? And also, they all were in a massive amount of debt, and the government of Massachusetts was purposely creating deflation by not printing money. And they had absolutely no voice in government. There was only the tiny elite ran Massachusetts, the new Massachusetts state. And so they revolted because they did not have a voice in government, because they wanted policies that would help debtors. And they almost won until they're finally put down. The wealthy merchants of Massachusetts, of Boston, paid the poor who lived in Boston to put down the rural farmers. This is going to terrify the wealthy elite all over the colonies. What if this happens elsewhere? Because the Articles of Confederation did not have an executive or an army to put down the rebellion. And because of that, that would lead directly to the writing of the Constitution. A strong central government with a strong executive that could put down rebellions, but also create a strong currency and things like that. They weren't sure about the army. Guys like Hamilton wanted like a military state to be created with rich businessmen. That was Hamilton. Any others? Yes. Republican Womanhood, and that's on page 71.
Yes.
It's on page 2, near the bottom. So Republican Womanhood was this idea of the new republic, that women would be responsible for the education of their children, to teach them to be good citizens in a republic. And so the idea was where women would teach young boys to become good voting citizens and teach young girls how to support them and educate their sons. This was kind of a sop to Abigail Adams, who John Adams' wife, who kept insisting to her husband, women deserve more rights. And he knew his wife was brilliant, but said, nope, that's not going to happen here. How about this? This should remind you of something. What? Say it again. Don't call it domesticity. I hate that word too. Is there another one? Yes. The Second Continental Congress, which is also on page 2. So that would be, they would meet right after Lexington and Concord, right after. And this would be the de facto government of the United States, of the early United States. They would declare independence. They would write the Articles of Confederation. They would appoint George Washington. They're the ones who would print worthless money called Continentals. They were the de facto, because there's nobody else. They were the government of the new United States. And they were in Philadelphia. And so they're the ones who sent that last gas to King George, the Olive Branch petition. We can go back. We don't have to kill each other and fight this war. And that's when King George would respond with the proclamation saying they're all traitors and will be tortured to death. And so they figured after Boston fell, or after the British left Boston, what the heck, we're dead men anyways. So that would be the de facto government. They would close up shop in 1783 when the British left New York. Is there another one? Yes.
Common Sense.
Common Sense was by Thomas Paine, and that's on, right below Second Continental Congress. And in it, this great work of propaganda by Thomas Paine that would try to convince Americans, average Americans, of that they should revolt, that they have the right to revolt, that they can, they have the power and not some king who became king by luck of birth. And so that's common sense. And this had maybe more influence than the Declaration of Independence over the early United States. Of course, the Declaration of Independence would be kind of brilliant. So, yes. British debt, which is, so the big thing about British debt is they've been fighting, they had civil war in the 17th century, then all those wars for empire with the French, culminating in the French and Indian War. And so they had all this debt buildup. They had to pay back those bonds. And so they decided to make the colonists pay. They got to pay taxes to help pay back their debt and pay for their own defense. So they're going to, it's because of the debt that they would start enforcing or try to force those navigation acts, which would be things like they do the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and then the biggie, the Tea Act. All those go right down. So we'll make the British pay, the French are gone, so we gonna, or we'll make the colonists pay. Is there another one? Yes. Oh, antebellum reforms on page 4, which is got it. How can I find it?
It's like the 5th row.
Oh, antebellum reforms. So these are, antebellum just simply means before the war. That's what antebellum means, or before the war. And these are the reforms all directly because of the Industrial Revolution. All the changes of the Industrial Revolution will lead to this whole reevaluation of everything. And so the biggies, and I think I put them in really small print, which I can still read. I'm very proud of myself. Okay, one antebellum, or, okay, transcendentalism. This idea by started by Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau. This idea of going back to nature to escape the empirical money grubbers and very individualistic, go back to nature to escape the new capitalism. Prohibition. So prohibition would begin here, and that's the beginnings of the temperance movement. But this would also be funded by businessmen who did not want hungover workers. The religion would be the Second Great Awakening. So I have a separate section for the Second Great Awakening, but a real shift in religion, because you have a combination of these new kind of fire and brimstone religions overtaking the older, more state Bible-based religion, like the Puritans or the Unitarians. Jail. There was a movement to do something about about crime and punishment. Before, they just would kind of randomly give sentences, and they thought that they could create something that could reform. So jails would be set up as a place where they could learn and think about it and be reformed. And that's when you start getting like sentences. You know, I think, oh, you go to 5 years to jail. It came out of this. It's seen as a reform. I don't know if it was a good thing or not. And then suffrage, that goes two ways. The first thing of suffrage would be to get all white men the right to vote. But that would then lead to, well, what about women? And would lead to the early women's rights movement, and that would culminate, and I have this down here, Seneca Falls, next to the Second Great Awakening. But it's really important to think that they're all because of the second industrial, or all because of the Industrial Revolution. The radical changes, yeah. Oh, the growth of parties. And so the Democrats and the Whigs would be the two parties that would be created out of the era of good feelings, where there's only one party. Up near the top. Yeah, up near the top where there's only the Republicans. And then, so we're still on page 4, the Democrats and the Whigs. And so the Democrats would be the party that would evolve around Andrew Jackson. Literally, they were first called the Democracy. And this was the party that believed in the common man. Common as in people not born of aristocratic birth. So the party of the common man. And they would be the party that would that really worried about the impact of large business and money and a few elite controlling the economy. So they would be against things like the bank or the tariff, because that just funneled money to the very wealthy. And they wanted, and would eventually win. universal white male suffrage. And every place except from South Carolina, because of course it's South Carolina. In opposition would be the Whigs. And the Whigs was they were much more divided, at least at first. This was just the I hate Andrew Jackson party. They all hate the democracy. They hated democracy. They wanted just a few people to vote. So they wanted elite few, and something like an aristocracy. And so in the North, the Whigs were the new capitalists, the businessmen. And so they're the ones who wanted the Bank of the United States. They're the ones who wanted easy credit. They wanted the tariff, which remember Henry Clay's American system. Tariffs, bank. Do I have American system on here? Oh yeah, on the bottom. Yeah, it is on here. Yeah. Tariffs, bank, and internal improvements. And they wanted more of an aristocracy. Southern Whigs hated the democracy, but they wanted things to help the big plantation owners. Those were the big plantation owners who were thinking more in terms of, yeah, we want the trade, but we want to keep the system of the South without poor whites voting. Oh, I should add, I have free labor and wage slavery at the bottom. The Whigs are the ones who believed in free labor. More and more Democrats believe capitalism was creating wage slavery. Is there another one? I'll let you finish writing. Actually, some of you have a lot filled in. Some of you don't. Thank goodness I gave this to you 2 weeks before spring break. Yeah. So that was the first really big financial panic and economic depression of capitalism. It was on page 4. Panic of 1837. Yeah, the first big financial panic and depression. It's right below growth of parties. So the first big financial depression. And what it did was, it was caused by over-speculation. Over-speculation and overproduction of the new thing of railroads. But also over-speculation in land. Land prices went up dramatically. And when Andrew Jackson tried to stop this by creating what's called the specie circular, where land can only be paid for in specie, which is gold and silver coin, the bubble burst and triggered a massive worldwide economic depression. And no one had any idea what to do. The first time ever, there was large numbers of unemployed. Never happened before. No one had any idea what to do about this. We still debate about it to this day. Is there another one? Yes. Oh, the other growth of parties on the back of page 3. So even though Madison and many of the founders were kind of hoping it'd just be this little group of elite that would decide everything and be unified, that's not what happened. You remember Madison said that in Federalist number 10, which is one of the Federalist papers. Where are we at here? I can't find, right in the middle, okay. So the two political parties, the Federalist Party, that would evolve around the ideas of Alexander Hamilton. And his goal was to create a country based upon manufacturing, business, and finance, and the army. Even though there was no army. That didn't happen on this cycle. And so he would propose 3 really big things. The first one would be the the first one would be the Assumption Bill to pay back all the debt. To get the country good credit, but pay it at 100% to put money in the hands of the wealthy, but also tie them to the country. The second big thing was the Bank of the United States, and I have another one there. I have it up there, I have the actual full Bank of the United States. And the third one was a high protective tariff to protect American industry with high taxes. That one didn't quite pass. The last thing is they were pro-British in the Anglo-French Wars. So this was elite, kind of an aristocracy. The Republican Party, sometimes you see them as the Republican Democratic Party. You might see them called that, even though they only call themselves Republicans. That'd be the ideas of Jefferson and Madison. And they, more and more, were, well, we want the power of the common man and an agrarian society. So they opposed all of these programs and supported the French in those wars. But they opposed all of them because they would in some way just benefit the merchant class, the wealthy, and the elite. Two parties, that's good. The democracy is still here, even though it's gone up and down all over the place. This Republican Party would fall apart. Eventually, the modern Republican Party would quit. Yes?
So on page 4, we have wage slavery. Disclaimer, you know what wage slavery is. I forgot how to articulate it.
Yeah, I understand. So wage slavery is that fear of capitalism, that workers are essentially becoming slaves to their bosses because they can never make enough money to leave. And they're stuck in those jobs. And they're stuck in a cycle of debt and poverty they can't get out. And they can't choose where they work. They can't choose their hours. They have no benefits. If they're hurt on the job, they're fired. Or if they die, their families starve. And so that's the way they look at it. So this just terrified people. And don't get free labor is like, no, you're not a slave. If you don't like your job, quit, and maybe someday you can be the capitalist. And so these are different views of capitalism. I should add, free labor, more and more, would become the ideology of the North before the Civil War. Aren't we great? Abraham Lincoln really believed in this. He didn't see the development of big business, but then again, it was all brand new. And the South will say the Northerners are a bunch of wage slaves. We have a better system. We treat our workers better. Another one. See what I said? I cover a lot of things. Are you writing down a lot? Are you enjoying it?
Yes.
Actually, this should help a lot. Even if you have something down, it's just nice hearing it again. Hand up first, yep. On page 3. Oh, Jefferson's philosophy. Yeah, just begin at period 4. And Jefferson's philosophy was a couple things. First off, the belief in the common man. That common men, regardless of their position in life, should be allowed to have a voice. Now, he thought the elite should rule people like him. He's not Jackson. But also he believed in an agrarian society of independent farmers making up their own mind. He also was laissez-faire. He was worried that government would just help a few winners. So he wanted laissez-faire. So he read Adam Smith. Of course, he never understood monopolies because it hadn't happened yet. And he also was obsessed with the West, movement westward, to expand westward. But lastly, and the most important thing about Jefferson, he was pragmatic. He was practical. He might say one thing today, but if tomorrow the situation came up, he would make what he thought was the best decision. So he was very thoughtful. Could also be seen as a hypocrite. For example, he would claim back in 1800 that we must have a strict interpretation of the enumerated powers in the Constitution. And yet when it came time to buy Louisiana, he jumped at it, even though that wasn't in the Constitution. Or he went to war against the Barbary pirates without declaring war. And he criticized the Federalists for doing that back against France in the 1790s. So he was pragmatic. So it really depends. If you like him, you say, what a sound, smart move. If you didn't like it, what a lying hypocrite. Most politicians are pragmatic. They usually think what's practical for them. Maybe not the country. Yes? So the Salem witch trial, which is on page 1. So the Salem witch trial would happen in just south of Boston in the harbor town of Salem. That was going through convulsions as the old Puritan establishment was dying out and being replaced by a much more diversified, because of the new economy, diversified population. So in this last gasp, it basically caught on to the witch panic that was happening across Europe. where women and a couple men were accused of being witches. And without evidence, what was it, 16 would be, 16 or 17 would be executed. 17 is right, sounds right to me.
It's 16.
16 were hung and then one was like
Pressed.
pressed.
Yeah, that's what it was. 16 hung, one pressed. No, they were not burned to the stake. Yeah, pressed, where they literally had to put a board on, they just put small stones on them. Kept putting them on until eventually, I can't even wrap my mind around how awful that would be. But this hysteria would die down when basically the old forces had to accept surrender, and they had been defeated. But this was an example of, you can see this throughout history, where the old guard tries to maintain their control of the culture. Time after time after time, including right now. It's always kind of happening. Yes?
And then New France and Champlain.
Okay, New France, same, it's on page 1 in Champlain. Champlain was an explorer, went down the Mississippi, down the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi, that gave the French the claim to the Mississippi River, and he just basically went to the Missouri and said, I claim all the tributaries of this. And that's how they got the claim to Louisiana. They didn't go there, they just claimed it. So the U.S. would buy that land claim down the road. But New France would be centered around Quebec. Not that many French colonists came, about 1/10 of the English colonists. And so, by definition, they had better relations with the tribes because they weren't taking as much land. They had good relations with the fur trade, and they're allied with them during the French and Indian War. And in contrary to future French colonies, they did not try to force them to become Catholics. Because they just didn't have enough knowledge, like what they do in Vietnam, they would try to force them. That's another story for another class. Is there another one? One more? Yes.
Jamestown and London Company.
Jamestown and London Company. Oh. Did someone hear something outside?
Nope. No.
Am I just hearing things?
Yeah.
Oh, the ghost? This was supposed to be locked, and it was wide open, and all the lights were on.
Yeah, that's usually how it is. There's no safety about the auditorium at all. It's terrifying. Safety. It's just absolutely
There's no one
terrifying.
hiding up there. Something just moved. No, I'm kidding. That actually would be really scary. You look back like there was a head all of a sudden appeared.
We have a mannequin head, and Josh used to put it up in that top window, or we have a stuffed monkey up there that he hang the feet down, so all you saw was just the finger and the feet moving out of the window. That was fun. Yeah, that's not great. We love Josh.
Not a bad idea. Okay, moving on. I like that. Okay, I forgot. Jamestown.
Yeah.
So Jamestown was the first successful British colony in what is now the continental United States, created in 1607. And it was a joint stock company called the London Company of Virginia. That means it was paid for by shareholders, not quite a corporation. And they had a contract or a charter from the government. Eventually, they would be taken over by England, but that's why so England could do colonization on the cheap, have someone else pay for it. So if it failed, they didn't lose. And Jamestown would, the first 3 or the first 6 years were horrible. Most of the people who went there died. They starved to death. They barely made it. But then, John Rolfe would find a way to cultivate what crop? Tobacco. Yep, tobacco. It was a race, but Connor was polite. You're exactly right, tobacco. And that would allow for the survival of Jamestown. It kind of set up the Chesapeake Colony's economy. That would be Maryland and Delaware also. A little bit North Carolina. North Carolina's a weird state. It's kind of a combination of the slave empire of the South and the Chesapeake. Yeah. We could. I know that the first one's a big one. That's more iron and coal. The first one was textiles. So what we are, we're the. That's awesome. Here's the thing, though. By just writing it down, it's just the process of writing it down helps you memorize it. That's right. It's better than typing. Typing you don't remember. That's pretty much been proven by my own personal evaluation. No, that actually it's been. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution is near the bottom of page 4. Is that right? So this is the shift that would begin. It's you see it as water power, iron, coal, steam would be the power, and it would start in the textile industries in Britain, but would come over to the United States in New England. It'd be the New England and Massachusetts because of fast-moving streams and water power, and so that would be where the Industrial Revolution began. And this would lead to the factory system, all production under one roof, and the development of a new economic system. Those who own the machines, aka the means of production, would become the capitalists, and it would create the system called capitalism. It would all come out of the Industrial Revolution, and also radically change the entire way people made a living. Just kind of a big. It would lead to the wage system, where people are now going to be based upon wage and workers in the market, where wages will be decided by supply and demand. And also, families are going to go from producers, where they made almost everything themselves, and they were kind of their own bosses. Tough, hard life, don't get me wrong, but they had that big sense of liberty to they became, or families became consumers, and they became dependent upon factories, and jobs and wages were now dependent upon the capitalists. This is a big shift. This would change everything. So that's the first Industrial Revolution. You want to do the second one real fast since we mentioned it? The second one is on page 6. Is that right? Yeah, the beginning of period 6. Let's do it real quick, just since we're here, right? Why not? The second Industrial Revolution. And what that was, this one is now more based upon steel and oil and railroads and chemicals. And the big one, electricity. And so the second Industrial Revolution is going to give us the world we know. And you see this is a period of incredible innovation. Remember those? So I have a whole separate section on innovation there, but you know, people like Edison or Faraday and the electric dynamo, Edison and the light bulb, Bell and the telephone, Griffin armor refrigerated rail cars. Just incredible innovation. Innovation building on top of other innovation. And so all this innovation, also the second Industrial Revolution, will lead to a new radical form of business called corporations. Because capitalism will become more and more expensive, so only a few people can afford this. It'll be during the second Industrial Revolution where you start seeing the divide between wealthy countries and poor countries just explode. All right, so let's go back to the other pages. Or do you want to start page 5 too?
No, can you just say the first page, first 4 pages?
Anything, any pages you want. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes. Dartmouth versus Woodward. So these are all from the Marshall Court, the very nationalist court by the Federalist Chief Justice. Long after the Federalist Party was over, they kept their influence for more power for the national government. So Dartmouth versus Woodward would be one of the most important cases. And the big thing about this one was it would set up the sanctity of contracts. That contracts are sacred and guaranteed by law. It's in the Constitution, but this clarified it. A contract will be protected by law. It is a legal binding document. And the important thing about this is, since contracts are almost always written to benefit the powerful, whoever writes contract, the one one who has the most powerful writes the contract. That's just the way it is. And so that means that, according to the Marshall Court, the government will be on the side of the powerful. The bigger the company, monopolies. And if you don't believe me, go try to take a loan out from a bank and try to write your own contract, write your own deal. You will not be getting the loan. Or for that matter, use something on the Google. So the Alien Edition Act, which is on page 3. All right? Yeah. So the Alien Sedition Act, okay, there it is. So just 2 above period 4. That would be passed. It was 3 laws, but they call it 2, and they would make it more difficult to become a citizen. So it increased the time to become naturalized up to 14 years. It also allowed them to deport dangerous aliens and banned sedition, criticism of the government. It banned criticism of the government. And the Federalists did this because they claimed to keep out dangerous radicals from France. But the real reason was to silence the Republican Party, to silence the Republicans by threatening them with arrest. These are the kind of laws that will be passed in totalitarian states. Or the Espionage Act of the United States in World War I. Is there another one? Oh, I almost forgot. Adams didn't like it, but he signed it. And so it's going to become Adams's law. So it's going to be used against him by the Republicans in 1800. Yes? Say it again? Oh, so now we've jumped to page 5. Up to 4. Let's do it. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Now I got to go through all the causes. Has everyone found it? Let's go then. The causes of the Civil War. Now, there are a number of big causes, but the most important were the different ideologies. The ideologies of the North and the South. Those different ideologies. The South believed in the positive good theory, that slavery was a good thing, and it should be spread. Or at least, let me phrase that. They claimed they believed it. I don't know if they really believed it. Don't trust anybody when they say they believe something that strong. They could be trying to for political gain. But that would be used to justify this. So they believe that slavery is a good thing and it's working and it's profitable. And Northerners who are opposed to abolitionists are all a bunch of John Browns who are coming to cut their throats in the middle of the night. And so Abraham Lincoln might have been the most moderate of all moderate Republicans who said slavery should be protected in the South, and they didn't believe him. They thought he was going to be a Trojan horse to destroy slavery. The North believed more and more, especially the new Republican Party, that the North has a more dynamic system that provides opportunity while slavery stifles it. And they started more and more to kind of use this kind of bastardized version of free labor. That's the system we should spread into the territories, not the horrible, stifling system of slavery. And they're tired of being bullied. They're tired of being bullied by the South through all those different laws. So that's the biggest and most important reason. And so when Abraham Lincoln's elected in 1860, the South thought, we must act now. Because if we wait 4 years, the Republican Party in the North and maybe in the South will get stronger. So we got to do it now as a preventative strike. And so that was the biggest cause. Now, don't forget, there's more population in the North, so they're worried about senatorial balance, running to be dominated in the House and the Senate. There was also the North had more industry, and the North, they did want a tariff, and the South didn't want it. So those concerned them. But the big thing was they just were convinced the North is coming to cut our throats in the middle of the night. So another one. What time is it?
Almost 7.
You want to take a half-hour break? Not about a 5-minute quick break. Okay.
No, that's well,
I need a drink of water.
I would quite literally sit.
By the way, how many have I gone over? I wasn't kidding. I could go through a lot.
It's genuinely impressive how you just know so much. I just think that's just the coolest thing to just ask someone a question like, yo, what was the Embargo Act? And then you just like rattle off what it leads to and everything. I think that's just incredible.
It's like a song. It's like a song.
It's like a song. History?
Yeah.
It's hard for me
So
to
if I remember one thing, it just kind of like flows out like you hear the first word of a song.
That makes sense. I like understand the basic idea of a lot of things, but then it's hard for me to usually connect it. It's like I love this kind of stuff, but it's like history is to you as like human anatomy is to me. So it's like hard to put everything together in this way, but it still is very fascinating to learn about.
And there's no easy way to get it. If you can put it together, that's when you start remembering. And also becomes more interesting.
Yeah, it's mostly the Civil War is what I have always just been interested in learning. So when we got there, I was like so excited to learn about it. And when we finished, I was like, oh, this sucks. It's to me that's the most important part of American history is the Civil War. Because I think that's like what led to America, in my opinion.
I think it is. It's kind of like finishing the revolution. We're still in this. I think it's right. I will be right back. I forgot to take the thing out the door. Better take the thing out the door. Then we'll get going again. I will go through as many as I can.
Oh my gosh, I have I missed a day. I don't like it. So I thought I just go back to school about my so I just have like 5 minutes.
Interesting. I never thought we'd see the day.
Yes.
My pencil.
My bad.
I kicked my pencil.
Like your sweatshirt.
Thank you. My grandma gave it to me.
Grandma gave it to you?
Yeah, she
I love
did.
that. I want to be your grandma. That's amazing.
Yes.
You look like a hottie.
Thank you.
The messy bun in the back.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's working.
And then
It's doing something.
I'm
It's
glad that
doing
you can like tie all of your hair back now.
I did it? Oh, I did. Oh, that I can. Me too.
Are we, Mr. Martin, how do you,
Yeah, so you got the review book. What happened in Nicaragua? So what happened in Nicaragua? That's what review book. Everybody, one thing real quick. I will go over this last page on Wednesday too. I'll answer any questions on it, but it's in your review book. It is in your review book. So Nicaragua, there was a revolution. It created kind of a quasi-communist government there. I'll give you an example. We're going to Nicaragua. Last page. Let's do it right now. We'll do Nicaragua. So there was a communist rebellion in Nicaragua. The government was overthrown. And the Reagan administration would try to create one of those. Remember, we did the Guatemala?
Wait, no one is caught up. Okay, we did Guatemala like Friday.
Yeah.
We get to it.
So Guatemala, they created that army, the fake army in Guatemala. They created a fake army in Honduras to get Guatemala. Well, they did the same thing in Nicaragua. They tried to create a army, basically a bunch of drug runners, to overthrow the government in Nicaragua. So it's on the last page on Nicaragua. Has everyone found Nicaragua?
To overthrow?
Yeah, try to overthrow the government in Nicaragua. The United States created this government. This guerrilla army they were called the Contras. They were called the Contras, counter-revolutionaries. And Contra, C-O-N-T-R-A. Contra.
Wait, so why?
Yeah, there was a communist revolution and the U.S. tried to overthrow it.
And the U.S. just didn't want the communists?
Didn't want the communists. So the And so Congress voted to not, that the U.S. could not help them because they were a bunch of basically drug runners. They were literally selling cocaine in the North to pay for the war effort. Good times in the 80s.
Let's go back.
But Reagan sent weapons to them anyways, illegally, blatantly violating the law, and sent weapons to them anyway. And this would eventually be rolled up into, if you look at that last page, Iran-Contra, the next thing. Iran-Contra, where the United States illegally traded weapons to Iran, violating the law, to free hostages held in Lebanon, the world's conflicts, and then used that money to fund the Contras illegally. And so the Reagan administration broke approximately 15 federal laws. And 19 people would be indicted for this. Reagan, though, by then was deep into the throes, we found out later, of dementia. And he had no idea what was going on. And he somehow got away with it. It's kind of amazing. In his deposition, he said, I do not know, or I can't recall, 137 times in an hour. There was an assassination attempt, and that accelerated dementia. He's never quite the same. So that's Iran-Contra. This is what we call a bad precedent. Allowing the president to get away with blatant crimes. Okay, let's go to, yeah.
You said the U.S. illegally
Hostages in Lebanon.
Okay.
And to give money to the Contras. One of those hostages, he would be killed, but his son is the head coach of the Golden State Warriors.
Wait,
Isn't that a weird world?
3 hostages in Lebanon
Who just won by 1 point today. I watched that game before I came here. All right, let's get back to the other one. Yes. I knew what I meant. All right. I don't even see it. Where's Bubble?
It's under
Iraq War.
Oh. I thought you said page 9. I thought you said page 9. Okay, Bubble. Okay, the bubble was the bubble in housing prices. A massive, just unprecedented increase in real estate. And that bubble, when it would burst, would bring down the entire world's economy because there's no regulations anymore on finance and speculation, and it led to a horrific panic. We have not seen a bubble like that ever since the 1920s. Now, fortunately, the bubble we're in now is bigger. There's just an article in the New York Times about the real estate bubble today, so this morning. And in just the last year and a half, the value of real estate in the United States has gone up by almost $8 trillion. Just the value of real estate.
What happens when it bursts?
Well, and the big thing is people who don't have homes, are they ever going to be able to afford to buy a home? I mean,
I don't want to think about that, actually.
I have a home. My wife and I own our house, and so like, that's like helps us. But you look at all these younger people, at least you can pay for college. No, wait a minute. Okay, that's another story.
Anti-federalists.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I'm sorry, people. We have problems that we have to deal with, but instead we're going to look at page 1. And which one is page 1? Mayflower Compact. So that would be done for the. Where are we at here? I can't find it now. For Plymouth Colony, which was the Plymouth Company, which was a joint stock company for the separatists, who came over to basically flee as they saw the decadent, devil-worshipping Anglicans, aka Episcopalians, as we all know. And
So, but half of the people on the Mayflower were not separatists. They were not Puritans. And they thought they were going to Jamestown. And they were mad. And so to convince them to not cut their throat, seriously, and go to Jamestown, the separatists came up with a compact which said, regardless of religion, we are all in this together, and it's going to be share and share alike, regardless if you are a separatist or not. Now, they were called the separatists, and they eventually absorbed into Boston. But at the end of the 19th century, they started calling them pilgrims. Why? So they wouldn't, because textbooks were written in New England, so they wanted the credit, and they wouldn't be confused with the Civil War, the separatists who left the Union in the War, the rebellion. So that's why we call them pilgrims. And they did not have the first Thanksgiving, but we give them the credit. And no, they did not wear big belt buckles, and yes, they got married in the nude. Is there anything else? If you got married in the nude, your debts would be absolved. We all know that.
I didn't hear any part of that conversation.
See if that works in court. Yes. So the Great Awakening near the bottom, that was a religious awakening that began in the mid 18th century as kind of reaction to the Enlightenment, where these enlightened ideas of rights and also the scientific revolution, where they're actually creating like the beginnings of a new universe. Do you remember the religion where it says the creator just snapped his fingers? Deism, yeah. That's a reaction to that. And the Second Great Awakening would be much more emotional, have charismatics who would lead this, and it spread like wildfire across New England. But it was still pretty much centered in the Bible. And the reason I'm saying that is the Second Great Awakening would really be centered on very charismatic preachers. So enough. Oh, Jonathan was one of the leaders of it. That's a good thing. Yes. Slavery and the slave trade, kind of a big one. And so this dealt with the whole issue of landholders in the new colonies had land, but they needed workers. And people did not willingly want to go be worked to death on a plantation. And so at first they tried to enslave American Indians, but American Indians, disease, or they knew how to run away. And so that is why they began to do what the Spanish did, start trading for slaves in Africa. And there was already an established slave trade from West Africa, East Africa, West Africa, but up through the Sahara to the Mediterranean. There's a huge slave market there. And so they just adapted that slave market. Instead of going north, they just went across the Atlantic from Africa. It was nothing to do about color of skin. It was just that was a slave trade. They got into it. They also enslaved white people too. And there were a lot of white slaves and American Indians. But this slave trade, and also because the African slaves were resistant to one of the strains of malaria. So they seemed to, they called it seasoning. Their seasoning was shorter to get used to the land. And out of this would become racism. Racism would come out of the slave trade. It was not by color of skin. It was just slaves to justify having slaves. And to keep white, poor people, white, Black, American Indians, everyone else fighting each other while those on top got rich. That reminds me of CRT. Is there another one? Yes. Enlightenment, Locke, and Franklin. And so the Enlightenment, or also called the Age of Reason, and this was an idea where they could come up with natural laws for society. They thought they could come up with laws how society should function. It's right near the bottom. Everyone found it on page 1. And the most famous of these would be John Locke, who wrote about, and would be used in the Declaration of Independence, would write that every person has certain rights, life, liberty, and property. And remember, Jefferson would take life, liberty, and property and turn that into life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and property rights. And that governments are created to protect those rights, and if they don't, overthrow them. And probably the most famous American example of the Enlightenment was Benjamin Franklin, who, even though very much a businessman and very much desired to get very wealthy, he also wrote or did a lot of scientific research, wrote about the relationship between man and government, tried to, the beginnings, at least he would be one of the first pushers for self-government, for some kind of democracy and ending slavery. He'd be one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence. Is there another one? Yes. You can. I was just giving you a bad time before. Oh, so after the Emancipation Proclamation, the United States could start recruiting black soldiers. And almost all of them were slaves. Slaves who had ran away to freedom. Page 5. Page 5, let's say 3/4 of the way down on the, looking at it on the right side. Huh?
No, right in the old. Oh, okay. 54 black soldiers.
Black soldiers, 54th Mass. Yeah, Glory. Good movie. Very good movie. The only problem was it is all the 54th were, they were actually people who had lived in the North before. They weren't descendants of slaves. About 2/3. And so, black soldiers could be recruited after the Emancipation Proclamation. By the end of the war, they would make 1/10 of the United States Army and be decisive for the victory of the United States. Be decisive. And the most famous would be the 54th Massachusetts, would be the first all-black regiment that would be used in combat. And even though it was a terrible attack, should never have been ordered, they fought with great distinction. So the 54th Massachusetts. And they had to accept lower pay, all sorts of little bits of racism and attacks, and only white officers. But without it, the U.S. could not have won. And they were, one more thing. They were not fighting just for freedom. They were fighting for equal rights, to be equal citizens. That's a big thing. That's why at Reconstruction, it's like, we owe these people. And then we know what's going to happen after Reconstruction. Is there another one? Anyone? Yes. Farewell address on 3. Oh, just a tiny. I know I could have left you less space, but it would have been hard. The farewell address. He would set the precedent. He wrote a letter that we read to Congress, but basically he warned against 2 things: foreign entanglements, foreign wars, because he could see that U.S. get involved in the Anglo-French wars, and political parties. He warned against parties because he was under the belief all the elites could just kind of all agree, and the 2 parties were already joining. He was being called a traitor and a monarchist by the Republicans, which is just so weird. So those were the 2 big things. Will be one other farewell address we'll know. Another one? Someone else had their hand up. Dixiecrat governments on page 5. Right at the bottom, Dixiecrat governments. These will be created during Reconstruction, the presidential Reconstruction. It was former Confederates who gave the oath and were right back in office. Former Confederates. And they're the ones who established the black codes, which basically restricted, now freedmen restricted into being basically just slightly above slaves. They were bound to the plantation they were on. So it's like the Confederacy never lost. It would be these governments that would be thrown out in congressional Reconstruction a year later. Yes.
Back to Bacon's Rebellion.
Let's go back to Bacon's Rebellion.
Let's go back to Bacon's Rebellion.
Page 1.
Page 1, yeah. Right there, beginning. Just like, you would like me about some more specifics about the slave codes.
So because of Bacon's Rebellion, the slave codes, these would, just make sure we know, these would be the laws that would be specifically done, restrictions on slaves who did not, they were ones who did not have that contract that indentured servants had. So slaves did not have the contract. And so that would make sure that they would not unify indentured servants and slaves. And the most important one of these was the fornication laws. That was the most important, that set up the descendants of slaves, of female slaves, will be slaves. The mother would decide. That set up permanent slavery. And so the big thing would be, hey, you know, slaves have that. They're slaves forever. But indentured servants aren't. There must be something different. And the other slave codes would be to restrict assembly of slaves. Also, they would not have the right to testify in court or to become a juror in a trial. Slaves would not. Also, they would not have the right to they could never vote or pick House of Burgesses, slaves. And the big thing was slaves had these restrictions, indentured servants didn't. And someday indentured servants will be free. And it was out of these slave codes that people started looking at, well, the slaves must be different, they must be inferior. What's different about them? Color of skin. And it would be out of Bacon's Rebellion and slave codes where racism comes from. Should add, that meant those on top, they made sure that the big lower class on the bottom are bickering amongst themselves and not unified. Which has happened time after time after time. Yes?
So, indentured servants, like in their time, did they have those restrictions as well?
Mm-hmm.
Or, okay.
But as soon as their contract was done, then they had that. And they also got a little piece of land called the headright. And so it became more and more, oh, must be color of skin, must be different. And it's amazing how fast it's swept. Because then it can be used, oh yeah, my color of skin. And if you're on, we got 4 people who was first. Let's start with Henry. What's that? That's on the bottom of page 3. Then we'll move up, right? Come on. So Henry Clay, the American System, that was his pro-business nationalistic program, but he wanted manufacturing. And it's going to be Bank of the United States. He wanted a strong bank, internal improvements, and a tariff, a protection tariff. And the tariff would not only protect American industry, but also pay for the roads and bridges and canals. And this is going to be debated time after time after time. Henry Clay is going to try to push this from 1816 all the way till he died. And Abraham Lincoln would get a lot of these things done when he was president because a big bulk of people who voted against him were rebelling. So, now. Page. Say it again. So Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Address. Page 5. So about 3/4 of the way down, page 5. Gettysburg. And that was the decisive U.S. defeat of the Confederate Army in 1863, stopping an invasion, the last real invasion of the North. Lee was trying to win an outright victory. Hopefully get Britain in the war, take pressure off of Vicksburg, but a decisive victory. And therefore the cream of the Confederate Army, their best soldiers would be killed. So they could never invade again. This was a terrible mistake by Lee. It was a foolish move. But to dedicate the National Cemetery at Gettysburg, Lincoln would give the Gettysburg Address. And in it, he laid out the reason for this war. That the war has got to be more than just to reunify the country. And so in it, he laid out this idea that the United States must finish what was started at the Declaration of Independence. And we must be fighting for this concept that all men are created equal. And we will let down every soldier who fought and died in every war, but especially Gettysburg, at that battle. We will let them down if we do not have a country based upon equality. That means we have to win. So he made the war for a greater cause. You know, Lincoln had really changed a lot from being, we should send freed slaves to Africa or Cuba, to equality. Who knows? So he laid down the cause for the war. Next one, right over here. So, yeah. Oh, we got it? Did you have your hand up? You got your hand up?
Yeah.
Which one?
Anti-federal.
Anti-Federalists on page 41, right? Is that page 3? Yeah, near the top of page 3. Anti-Federalists. These were people who opposed the ratification of the Constitution. They opposed the ratification of the Constitution. And there were men like Patrick Henry or Sam Adams. And they feared the strong central government that the Constitution was going to create. And also the power of taxation, double taxation, where state and federal government could tax. They greatly feared also that there was no enumerated Bill of Rights. And one of the biggest, especially southern states, was it did not guarantee that states could control their militia. Because the Constitution says the federal government controls the militia. And it's very important for certain states to have a militia. Because you must be able to put down slave rebellions. So they opposed this. And the big thing about the Anti-Federalists, they lost steam when Madison agreed to write a Bill of Rights, which he would write 12 amendments, 10 amendments would be ratified. And in that Bill of Rights, he included the Second Amendment, which would be for state control of regulated militias. They were kind of divided. The Federalists had a big advantage. They wanted one thing, the Constitution. So they could just form around that. So another one. Any other one? Yes. Southern slave colonies on page 2. Yeah, right near the top. And these were the colonies that, from basically Georgia all the way up to Maryland and Delaware. And these are the ones that really had a very less diversified economy than New England or Northern colonies. And so their entire economic system was based upon plantation agriculture, cash crops, and more, the biggest part of their economy was becoming slaves. Slaves would be incredibly valuable commodity. They could buy and sell, use for collateral for loans. And so the slaveholders are going to basically control the economy of the South. And that's why fewer people, when they immigrated in the 19th century, they went north because there's just less chances. Yes? Mercantilism right below. That is the colonial policy where colonies are designed to provide raw materials and a market for the mother country. And the mother country would, and the mother country would provide manufactured goods and make sure that they can't produce anything in the colonies. So they have to buy the manufactured goods from the colonies. And so it's because of that policy to basically suck as much gold as possible. Oh, I forgot one more thing. It's for the mother country to maximize exports. So they don't have to buy raw materials from any other country, they'll get it from their colonies. That would lead directly to the Navigation Acts, and that's what the British would try to do to their colonies. Then it leads to the debt and the war, all the steps of war. I mean, if you had an essay question about that, or like a short answer question, boy, you could throw mercantilism in there. That's a good thing. And that's one of those, ooh, they know what they're talking about. You want the person grading it to go, ooh, they know what they're talking about. They're smart. I want to help them. I want to be their friend. Yes. So the Navigation Acts, also sometimes called the Trade and Navigation Acts, was to enforce mercantilism. But the most important of these were a tax on certain commodities. A tax on commodities. A duty that would be collected on everything from tobacco to the sale of tea to wood, you name it. Another part of the Navigation Acts were to make sure all trade would be on English ships so they could collect the tax. Another one would be to restrict colonial industry, like an iron act, so there would not be any iron production, things like that. But the British could not enforce these laws. They're at war, it's too far away. just couldn't enforce it. And so that is going to be called salutary neglect. Because actually, it helped create a unique colonial economy, which actually helped Britain. But they would end salutary neglect to try to pay back their debt after the French and Indian War. So we got that nice tie into everything. What time is it? Do a few more and we're done? Sound good? We've covered a lot. I think I've covered 3 things.
About assumption bills.
At least 2.
Who are you?
Okay, that orange thing moved. It was on the other side. I asked you. It did seem like it moved. Yes.
The
Triangle trade on top. That is the trade route. The whole thing to maximize profits, to make sure the ships are never empty. So the triangular trade, the generic one, would be start in New England. Start in New England, bringing rum down to Africa and trade that for slaves. Slaves to the Caribbean, to the West Indies, as they would have called it, and they would trade those for molasses up to New England where they make the rum. So a nice triangle. So the ships always have something on them. So you maximize the profits. And the horrific journey from Africa to the New World, as in that triangular trade, would be the Middle Passage. The horrific trip. Another one, yes. Okay, conscription. Finally, in 1863, the United States had to start drafting people. Page 5, it's right above black soldiers. Yeah, right above black soldiers. And so this is going to draft soldiers. But the wealthy could buy their way out or hire a substitute. So this was a war that greatly benefited the very rich, who got even richer as they stayed home. And so poor working people were drafted. And the first draft notices came out right after the Battle of Gettysburg and those casualty numbers. And that's going to trigger people in New York who maybe didn't want to fight, didn't want to go to the jobs they never had, to riot. Riot, and this was really a class war. They were angry at the wealthy that could get out of the draft. But the target of that wrath were blacks. The idea, we're fighting for your freedom so you can come up and take my job. I die and I'm wounded so you come up and get my job. And so for 3 days, and as many as, I've seen as high as 10,000 people died. We don't know. Troops fresh from Gettysburg had to come down, put it down. They fired volleys into the crowd. Heck, U.S. Navy ships fired into the crowd. So it shows how divisive this war was. And that's kind of Bacon's rebellion thinking again. So another one. So that's on page 4. The Virginia and Kentucky Reservation, almost right in the middle on the right side. And these were written by Jefferson and Madison in opposition to the Alien and Sedition Act. And it said, has everyone found them? Everyone found them? That states could nullify or overturn laws they see as unconstitutional. So things like the Sedition Act. And if the federal government resists, then nullification, then they secede. So that was going to be the hammer. Little did Jefferson know the unforeseen consequences. This would be the justification that Calhoun would use in the nullification crisis, and this would be used as justification for South Carolina and the rest of the South to leave. It was unclear how you decide the constitutionality of laws. Eventually, the Supreme Court would give it that power in Marbury versus Madison, which is on the top of page 4. Judicial review, Marbury versus Madison. Any others? We have a few more, yeah. Oh, you want to go all the way to page 10? I do too. Okay, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. Yeah, we're going to go on to page 10. What the heck, right? I am going to talk about this in class tomorrow. You guys want to wait till tomorrow? Or do you want to hear about it real quick? How about I tell you very quickly? Nixon versus Kennedy. Remember the bomber gap? Well, Kennedy would say there was a missile gap now. And it works quite well. And it'd be the first ever debate, first ever campaign where there was a debate. And Kennedy looked great in the debate, and poor Nixon, not that I've liked Nixon. Nixon will be the only president I will tell you I despise. The rest of them you have to guess. I don't like Franklin Pierce either. I'm not a big fan of Andrew Johnson. I like Lincoln.
Yeah.
Nixon hurt his knee really bad, and so it looked gaunt and weak, and a few other things, but it was first more image on the television screen, just would dominate. And Kennedy looked great. He just had that look, even though he was an incredibly ill, desperately ill man.
And then I know you want us to have like up to the election of that.
Yeah.
Else?
So on period 8, I'm going to try to go through as many as I can over the next couple of days on 8 months. Okay, this is what I'm going to do for period 8 and for period 7 and 8. If anybody has this filled out, I will give you extra credit for it. All right? I'll give you extra credit. If not, these are the things you have to know. So go, I would jot something down because these are things you have to know. But I'm not going to require you to fill it out. But I'll give you extra credit if you do. Sound good? Couple more, and then I'm done. Yes.
Versus Maryland.
McCulloch versus Maryland.
Yeah, that was.
On top of page 4, McCulloch versus Maryland. Can't find it. Okay, McCulloch versus Maryland. This basically said that the national bank can be created. And
Wait, did you say can or can't?
yeah, can be created because it is an implied powers. And so it said that there are implied powers in the Constitution, that necessary and proper clause, thus expanding the power of the federal government, because that allows Congress to pass laws outside the realm of the Constitution, and therefore the president can carry out those laws. So that greatly expands the power of the national government. Gibbons versus Ogden is interstate commerce. Interstate commerce. Same deal. Federal government can regulate that. And that would be so many laws, everything from minimum wage to environmental laws. Yes. Unionism and wage system. Okay, on the top of page 5. The top of page 5, unionism. And unionism is that idea of economies of scale. One worker alone has no power, but if they unify, they have power. So workers started to unify because alone they have no power, together they have power. And the big thing unions want is a contract for all workers. That would not only, the biggest thing is, more and more in the modern world, is it means higher wages. But it also means more rights and benefits, like certain protections on the job. For example, like how long you work, what kind of position they put you in, maybe safety requirements, things like that. And so that's what unions want. And of course, companies are going to fight this bitterly because that means higher wages and lower costs. But their biggest complaint was the wage system. That wages are no longer, or now it's clear, they are not decided by how hard you work or even your skill level. Wages are decided by the market. And that's a big shift. And unions say, no, we want to be paid a little bit based upon our hard work or whatever it might be. That's why like getting hourly pay was seen as a big deal. The companies would fight this tooth and nail. There wouldn't be real unionism until the New Deal. Any others? Yeah, more. Page 5. Oh, Native is known as, oh, good. They're a party that tried to compete for the second party. It's on page 5, 3 down from the top on the right, or 4 down from the top. And they would run in 1856. This was the anti-immigrant party. The anti-immigrant party in 1856. And they would do quite well in the election. quite well. But the Republican Party became the party that would become the second party after the Democrats. And they were given the nickname Know Nothing, but they were intensely anti-Catholic and worried that immigrants would come take their jobs. So they would do things about not being real Americans, whatever that meant. Today, what are the natives are calling it? Legacy Americans. That's what they're calling it today. Yeah, legacy Americans today. So northern know-nothings would become Republicans, southern know-nothings would become Democrats. I'm done.
Thank you so much.
How many did we cover? We got a lot?
Yes.
So what are we doing on Wednesday? We'll do it again? I'll do it on Wednesday. But see, that's why I want to start on page 5. Huh? Okay, everybody, on Wednesday, 6:30. So a little bit later, some activities to get time to, but I got to do it. Oh, if you have to go eat lunch. Oh, Thursday. Remember, I didn't say you have to come in, do one practice test on Thursday, even if you're called out. So if you come fourth period, there's a rumor there might be pizza. I've not seen it's good pizza, so don't even ask. Hey, you come first, third, or fourth. Heck, if you want to come second, you can come second. If you come in the morning, you can come. But if you come fourth period, I'm gonna have someone go get you. All right, goodbye, everybody. Have a good day.
Ashley.
I have no idea if this filmed or not. Huh? On Thursday? Kind of. I'm going to give you a credit to do it. Yeah. I mean, if they really can't come, but I really want you to come in.
I would skip.